Hello everybody, Mac here. Welcome back to the show. What we are taking a look at today is Warduke's companion, Grimsword. Now, this is another Neca D&D offering. This is another basically all grown up version of a 3 3/4 inch figure that was out in the 80s. Now, the only difference between this and Warduke is, for me anyway, I have no connection to this figure at all. I never had the original figure. To be completely honest, I never even knew Grimsword was a figure until NECA started advertising him, and I had to look him up. I didn't even see him as part of the line from the 80s. I don't remember him, so he is completely new to me. However, I do like his style, I do like his design, and if we open this up, he's huge. I'm digging on his size. I can't wait to get him out of the box to actually take a look at how big this beast actually is. But speaking of the box, let's start with that. We have some really nice artwork right here on the front of the box. The classic Dungeons & Dragons logo should almost have advanced right there. But I really like this. This really strikes me as something... This is like a modern design of those old 80s graphics from the D&D modules and books. On the side, we have a photo of him, Dungeons & Dragons, Grimsword on the bottom. On the back, we have pretty promo shots, cross-sell for Warduke right there, and we have a little bio on him. Grimsword, evil knight, is a mighty warrior and fierce warrior. He hopes to rule the land someday after he defeats all his enemies in combat. Grimsword has many evil friends fighting by his side, but he cannot be trusted. He will betray or fight anyone in order to gain power. No wonder they get along so well. Then on this side, it's just the name, the D&D logo, the little icon of Grimsword right there. Oh, the hook's coming apart, but up top, D&D, Grimsword on the bottom, nothing much to look at. And then you saw before that we opened this up, and you have another pretty promo photo of Grimsword right here with his flail, and then him in the window box, and you can see he just takes up the whole window right here. And he has his weapons and his accessories, and I really can't wait to get him out, get him in my hands, take a look, and honestly, yeah, see how he stacks up to Warduke. So, without further ado, let's get him out of the box and let's take a look at NECA Dungeons & Dragons Ultimate Action Figure, Grimsword. Okay, here Grimsword is out of the box, and putting the tape measure to him, we can see he is 8 inches to the top of his helmet, approximately 8.5 inches to the top of the helmet's crest. I cannot wait for you to see him next to the other figures in the size comparison. I mean, you saw with the tape measure to him how tall he is, but I cannot express how big and chunky and bulky our boy Grimsword here is. Also, not nearly as delicate as I was expecting. With Warduke, the ears, the bat wings on the helmet were a little fragile. Some of the armor work on him was a little fragile. He had all those spikes that were pretty stiff, but still had a little bit of flexibility to them. But there was definitely, maybe fragile isn't the right word, maybe delicate is a better way to put it with how to handle Warduke. Grimsword, though, is very rubbery in a lot of the right places. Like, this isn't nearly as stiff as I thought it would be. This is a piece of rubber that has some give to it. The horns up here on the helmet, they're stiff, but that's about the only stiffness they have to them. His rattler's tail right here is very rubbery. The snake in and of itself is very rubbery. I can press in on it. His pads right here, like his elbow and knee pads, these are pieces of rubber as well that bend. You'll see that in the articulation, that bend and morph with the bending of the limbs. And even the hands, all of his hand accessories or hand options have some rubber and some give to them. So even though he's very big, I never feel like his size is going to, like if he falls over, his weight isn't going to make something break off of him, because he just feels like he could handle a fall. Even this right in here, down here at the bottom of his armor, there's very much a rubber give to this right here. But that is also having said that, his scale mail right here is very rigid, very textured, has a real nice feel to it, and a real nice look to it. Like, with the way that the lights are hitting the silver, I absolutely love how you can see all those crevices, and it kind of casts little shadows, mini shadows within the armor itself, giving it a really nice look to it. And even the armor that is painted, like even right here, where you can see, come on, focus in, where you can see like the battle damage of the armor. Like, he took a hit right here on his, on the upper part of his chest. You can see some weathering right here in the helmet, that the paint isn't exactly, it's not exactly a fresh coat of paint. You can even see this crack running down here on his visor. Those red eyes peering out from underneath the helmet, that between the size, the type of armor he wears, and those red eyes peering out, like, you really get the impression, no matter what I read on his bio, but you really get the impression that he's not quite human. That there's like something else sinister lurking underneath all of this black armor right here. And it's fantastic. Like, they even did some really good weathering here on the back of his armor, where you can sort of see the silver coming through at these peaks, and then up on this shoulder right here along the rim. The aging and the weathering is very well placed on Grimsword's armor here. And I love the snake head on the one knee pad, not both of them. And this is just like sort of like a classic spiked knee pad. And then the feet down here have some great weathering, some great texturing to them as well. And that's the other thing. A lot of this is textured really nicely. Like, you run your finger over the battle damage on the breastplate, you can really feel those gouges and those cuts within it. And I just noticed that that red line is the snake's tongue, coming out. That's really cool. That's really cool. Now let's take a look at the articulation, that the head can do a full 360 turn. Like I said, these peaks right here are probably the most delicate part, which I find interesting that they didn't make these quite as rubbery as they did the rest of it, since these are the ones that could potentially have the most damage done to them. He has a little bit of tilt in the head, not a whole lot. And I think that's mostly restricted because of these helmet spikes right here. He can look up fairly well. He can look down not so well. His arm, this one anyway, turn your head, my man. This one anyway will do a complete 360. Obviously, this one is going to be hampered by the shoulder armor right here. The arms will come up to just under 90, or no, actually right about 90. The arm seems to have a lot more travel in it, and is a lot easier to move than Morduke's was as well. He has the bicep swivel. He has a single jointed elbow that comes up to just under 90, and that is a hinge and swivel elbow. The wrists pivot, and they swivel back, and they pivot in and out. Once again, all of the hands pivot in and out. They should, especially the weapon-wielding hands, should pivot up and down, but they don't. Now, all of this right in here does come at a cost, that it feels like there should be an ab crunch in there, but because of this, quite obviously, he won't do it. But he does have a full torso twist. He has a little bit of rock side to side. He can go back a little bit. He can go forward a little bit. And this is one instance where I don't mind that he doesn't have a lot of flexibility in the torso, because quite frankly, with this bulky piece of armor, even in real life, a person would have pretty much zero mobility in the torso right there. So for a figure like this, especially with all of this going on, I don't mind the lack of mobility. We come down to the legs. They have a great hip swivel right in here. Todd, take note. This is how it's supposed to work. The leg will come up to there. The leg will go back to there. Once again, not a whole lot of mobility with that leg. Single jointed knees that feel like they could go up to 90, but because of the heavy rubber of the knee pad, they stop right there. Hinge and swivel at the knee. Ankle rocks back. That's the only tight joint I've had so far. Ankle rocks forward. And we have a forward-facing pin for some rocker on the ankle. And it's worth noting that for as fairly easy as moving these limbs around was, this is the first NECA figure I didn't have to heat up or put under hot water to get him to move like this. He moved this easily coming out of the box, which also, once again, for a NECA figure, is pretty impressive. Grimsword has more hand options than Warduke did. Out of the box, he has sort of like these open-fingered sort of monster clawing hands. He comes with a pair of closed fists, which look great. Like if you look at it close up right here, you can see there's some real good weathering on the knuckles. Like he's knocked a few jaws with these fists. Whereas Warduke came with one pointing finger, Grimsword comes with two, one for each hand. And finally, of course, Grimsword comes with his gripping hands, because what good is a Black Knight if he can't hold his sword? And speaking of swords, that is the first accessory we're going to take a look at, is his sword, that it has this curved sort of saber look to it, which was actually a very popular design for D&D in the 80s. And you'll notice that this is a much more simplistic design than Warduke was, and I don't mind that. I don't mind that they didn't try to basically make two of the same figure. Each of them are going to have their own style, their own design. Warduke, where he will be very elaborate, very hyper-detailed. Grimsword is a little bit more basic, and I'm actually okay with that. Now, he can wield these hands he can wield this sword in his gripping hands, no doubt, but he also, you may have noticed that there's this rattler's tail hanging off, which, as I said, is a very soft piece of rubber, so it won't break, but it will also expand a little bit, because you can use it as a hanger right there to hang the saber from and sort of use it as a sheath. But it does fit very well into his hand. Now, Warduke had a very tight grip, and this is a little tight as well, getting it in there. But like I said, the hands are very rubbery, that they'll close back around the hilt. And there you go. He has a good grip on it. It's not going anywhere. Oh, the wrist turned a little bit. It's not going anywhere. And he looks good holding it. And the deco, the paint deco, everything blends in with the rest of his look. Looks really good. The next thing we're going to take a look at is his shield, and look at this thing. This is awesome. We have a standard kite shield right here, but look at how big the bust is of this snake head that just totally goes with the rest of the motif of his armor. And you have this tongue coming down right here. This looks fantastic. The coloring, the design, the sculpt, everything about this just looks fantastic. And once again, you have some weathering. You have some battle damage here on the shield, like you can see where the shield has taken some hits, and you have that weathering on it. And once again, just like with the armor, it has some really good texturing, that when you run your hand over it, you can really feel those gouges in the shield. And then when we flip it over, it's pretty bare right here, but I don't know if it's showing up on camera. You have a wood pattern. Whoop. Come on, focus. Focus in. You have this wood pattern right here, so that it does look like a piece of leather or hide stretched over a wooden shield, and that looks really cool. And look at the weathering for the leather straps as well. This whole thing works. This whole thing looks fantastic. There's some really great attention to detail. You can even see like the grain lines in the wood paneling. Whoop. Very good for this shield. And you also notice that both of these, both of these have a more flexible sort of fake leather look to it. And that's because he doesn't really hold the shield so much as the shield just slips over his arm and fits on him like that. So it's kind of like just a giant bracer for him. And that's pretty cool. I kind of like how it just sort of like fits right onto his arm like that. And that brings us to his final weapon, which is, of course, the Cobra Flail. And I love, once again, I cannot talk enough about how well done the sculpt and the design on this is. Even taking a look at the scaling on the back of the Cobra hood, the gold that is sort of like the tail of the cobra, sort of like a rattler's tail that also makes the handle. And then we have this real chain with this real spiked ball right here, and some really, really good texture and design and weathering on the spiked ball. And interestingly enough, for as rubbery as some of Grimsword is, this is really hard and sharp. I feel like I could draw blood if I squeezed in on this hard enough. We have a real chain as part of the flail. And I just really like, my only concern is that this might eventually break because this is rubbery, but it really definitely feels like it's pivoting right at that spot where it connects with the mouth. Just kind of concerned that that might break over time. And this, just like the sword, fits real well. Actually even fits better into his hand, fits easier into his hand, than the sword does. Now, something else that I really like about this, if you want him just going all in, he has the shield, he has the flail, but he also still has this open hand that you could just really arm him up. And he can just be whipping everything around because, truthfully, I think this guy is big enough that he could do it. And now for size comparison, here he is next to his counterpart, the NECA Toys Dungeons & Dragons Warduke, and the McFarlane Toys Witcher 3 Aridin Brioche Glass. Here he is beside the Mattel Masterverse 40th Anniversary He-Man, and once again, McFarlane Toys Witcher 3 Geralt of Rivia. Here he is beside a pair of my favorite McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse Collect-to-Build figures, the Frost King from the Endless Winter Wave, and Atrocitus from the, it was Darkest Night Wave, Blackest Night Wave. And finally, here he is beside some Hasbro 1/12 scale figures. We have G.I. Joe Classified Series Serpentor, which if you remember, Serpentor is bigger than the standard 6-inch figure, and he's still much shorter. Same motif, though. And on the other side, we have the Hasbro Dungeons & Dragons Deluxe Driz Duerdin. Well, what is there to say? I like this guy. I mean, I really like this guy. Do I like him as much as Warduke? No. Do I think he's as good as Warduke? In some ways, yes, I do. But I still think Warduke, especially for the price of these guys, I still think Warduke, you definitely get the more bang for your buck with him. I like Grimsword, though. Don't get me wrong. I like his size. I like his bulk. I like his intimidation factor. I really like his accessories. I didn't think I was going to like the Cobra Flail nearly as much as I do, the ball and chain, nearly as much as I do. But the detail on the sculpt, the fine detail on the scales, has won me over. And that, I thought I was going to display him more with the sword. I think I'm definitely going to display him more with the King Cobra Flail. And speaking of snakes, that shield is awesome. I love how they have that constant snake motif, that it's not just wrapped around his torso. He has the flail, he has the shield, he has that one that's coming out through the kneecap. And speaking of the kneecap and the knee pads and the elbow pads, I really appreciate that a figure this big has enough rubber parts on it that you don't feel like you're going to break it every time you try to move him. If those knee and elbow pads would have been a more solid plastic, I really feel like it would have hindered articulation much more than even the rubber does, because the rubber does hinder it a little bit, don't get me wrong, but not nearly as much if it was a harder plastic. And then, of course, you also run into the problem of it snapping. And if they would have tried to make it part of the mold for the size of those elbow guards and knee guards, I know I'm calling them pads, they're guards, it wouldn't have looked right whenever you tried to bend the knee or bend the elbow. It just wouldn't have. Having said that, having praised those rubber pieces, I really question why the horns coming out the side of the helmet are a harder, stiffer plastic, especially because with the way that you move the head around, it seems like that has much more in danger of breaking because of it dragging on the armor itself. I just think they should have made those rubbery as well. And I like that the hands are rubbery. I like that it feels like whenever you put the weapons in his hands, his gripping hands, even though they have to stretch a little bit more, that though they will form back around the handle. That's one thing I didn't talk about with Warduke, that I'm worried that the more I try and take the sword in and out of that stiff gauntleted hand, eventually it's just going to become loose and he's not going to have a real good grip on it. These, I feel, with that soft rubber, even if it starts to loosen up, there's enough friction between the handle and his hand, the hilt of his weapon and his hand, that he'll be able to keep a good grip on it. My only complaint, and you may have seen it happen a few times while I was moving him around on camera, his wrist sockets are very loose, that if he tries to hold his sword up, sometimes it'll start to twist to the side, one side or the other. That is a very easy fix, and that may also just be something that is indicative of my figure and not a hang up across the line, but that's a real easy fix. Even if I just get something like fingernail polish remover or clear fingernail polish, and just paint it up around that wrist peg, tighten things up, everything will be good. Love the sculpt, love the paint apps, love the weathering on this guy. I cannot talk about that enough. The weathering and the texture looks great. You really believe this guy has been through a few wars. Like I said, I have no connection to this figure. I didn't even know this guy was around in the 80s. I do not remember seeing him at all. I remember a lot of the 80s line. I remember not getting the animated series figures like I wanted when I was a kid. I remember Warduke. I had Warduke. I remember Kellic. I remember that Goblin Thief that's coming out. And I definitely remember Strongheart. Don't remember Grimsword. But I'm kind of glad because it's good to have it's nice to have a surprise. So that is what I have. And because of these two, I am really, him and Warduke that is, I am really looking forward to the rest of the Neca D&D line. I hope it goes further than just the next wave that are coming out. I hope they get permission to start doing some other figures, or maybe even doing figures that didn't exist in the 80s, taking like NPCs and character models, because I will be completely honest, if they can start doing just not regular characters, but if they can start doing like the more famous NPC characters from D&D of old, especially after looking at Grimsword here, I would love for them to do a Lord Soth figure. I don't know if any of you have ever noticed in some of the videos, but I have Soth tattooed on my arm, and I would love, Neca, if you're watching, because I know you're not, I would love for you to do a Lord Soth figure. Maybe even with a horse. Have it as a deluxe release. That would be awesome. With the, riding a nightmare. That would be so cool. All right, so until that happens, my friends, play well, stay safe, stay healthy, and as always, thank you for watching.